Picture this. You're starting your speech, and it goes well. You're doing really well. Your speech is coming along. People are gathering what you're understanding. They're really focused in what you're saying. And you're selling it. You're really selling it. All the way through your speech, you got those points. You keep hammering them home. People are getting it. They're nodding in agreement. Everything seems to be fine. You're excited. You're feeling good. You're wrapping up. You're going to the end. And then you come to the questions. You have to ask, does anyone have any questions? If you've ever been in a question and answer period for speech, you know that's where things can go downhill fast. All of a sudden an audience that seems to be agreeing with you turns on you. All of a sudden the things they're nodding about, they start thinking about it and they start shaking their heads and thinking, no, I don't think so. You can see it going through their mind. What do? You're at that question period. You got to ask questions. People have got questions about what you're talking about. You got to answer these questions. How do you answer them best and effectively so you don't just destroy your entire speech then and there? So you may know some really, really good speeches have been completely destroyed because the speaker didn't know how to handle a question and answer session. They said things in a way that undermined their point, didn't really know what the heck they were talking about. They got outside of the areas where they were supposed to be in, and it got bad. It got bad. And for those speakers, it got bad fast, and once it got bad, when they were supposed to wrap the whole thing up, it was not good at all. So how do you overcome that? Make sure that problem doesn't happen. Well, the whole trick about it is to understand the question and answer period and the three-step process to use to answer questions. You may be thinking, Tim, questions are no big deal. I got this. I know what I'm talking about. I know my speech. They can ask any question they want, and I'm just going to answer it right on the top of my head. Boom, no problem. Okay, fine. Go ahead. But if you don't take the question and answer period seriously, and it really tanks, and all of a sudden people aren't thinking anything more about your speech, you're just thinking, wow, what a horrible question and answer period, what are you going to do? Instead, a better idea is to focus on that three-step process for answering your questions. It's a simple process, but an effective process. 3 simple, easily remembered steps you can use the next time you've got those questions and answers coming at you. You've got those questions coming at you, you're going to be able to handle it effectively with answers that really work because you're going through the 3-step process. Each step of the process helps you a little bit more in answering the question. Now, of course, hopefully you know what the heck you're talking about. If you're getting up there and you're giving a speech and you have no clue what you're talking about, question and answer period, even if you know the 3-step process, nothing can save you. It's going to be a disaster. But if you know what you're talking about, you understand it, then you can actually use the question and answer period to help you as a speaker, to help you really have a stronger, more powerful speech. Because after all, what really matters in a speech is, what do the audience think when they leave? And what does the audience think day after, a week after, a year after they hear that speech? An effective question and answer period will make sure that the things that they think that sink in there are something that really is going to help your speech, your ideas, and your thoughts continue. Because the goal of every speaker is to make sure that their thoughts continue in the audience's mind. And open the audience up to a new perspective. And you can use the question and answer period effectively if you understand and know how to use this 3-step process. So today you're going to learn about that 3-step process. First step, the second step, and then the third step, which a lot of speakers leave out, but it's very important to do. The first step is something that many speakers don't bother that much about. They figure, it's not that important, it's not a big deal. But if you don't do the first step, the other steps aren't going to matter. In fact, the other steps could actually make your speech worse and worse and worse. It all begins with that first step. It may seem like not a big deal, but using that first step effectively will make sure you really solidly anchor that point in your audience's mind. They really get what you're going to be talking about. They understand what's going on. That you can really take command up there and be in charge because you're effectively going through and getting this point across. It's just one step. Easy to do. And once you do it, the audience is more comfortable and you're more comfortable if you took that necessary step, that first necessary step. And the first step is to repeat. The first step is to repeat. Repeat. When someone asks a question, any question out there, repeat that question. And here's the reason you do it. Because you most likely have a microphone, or at least you're in the front facing the audience. They're out there in the audience, and people may not have heard the question. In fact, very likely people won't have heard the question. Even when they're talking directly to you and you can hear them clearly, the person behind them probably hasn't even heard the question. And if you start answering a question and the whole audience has no clue, most of the audience has no clue what that question is, then the audience is just going to be thinking, well, I don't know what they're talking about. He's going on and blah, blah, blah about something. Maybe it's important, maybe it's not, but I don't know what the question is. So, repeat. Repeat that question. Now, when you repeat, be careful, because audiences, as you know, people in audiences, some of them can make sentences, questions really long. Particularly men. Men quite often like to take a question and turn it into a huge statement. And so trying to figure out the question is a big deal for you, also for the audience. So when you repeat them, also take that big question, break it down, and really say what it is. And a simple way to say it is, what I hear you saying, what I hear you asking is, what's the nature of the AMF process? It's that simple. Repeat it, break it down to what basically that question is. Because sometimes people go on and on and on and on and on. And as soon as you have to cut them off and say, okay, here's the question. Here's what the question is. And when you repeat the question, the audience will be even happier because they probably didn't understand what the question was either. Heck, the person giving the question may be happy because they may not know what the heck is going on. When you repeat the question, you give an acknowledgement of the audience that there is a question there and that question is important. It's another thing. It makes the question important. The question's important enough to ask. It's important enough to repeat to make sure you've gotten it right. Because every now and then you repeat the question, the person will say, no, that's not what I meant at all. And then they'll clarify. And you'll have to re-clarify and repeat the question. When you repeat that question, and you finally get that acknowledgement, that connection, then you've got a place to go. Then the whole audience, everybody is all on the same page. They all know what you're going to talk about. They all understand it. They all get it. The person who asked the question gets it, and everybody else gets it too. And because you probably have a microphone, and make sure everyone can hear that question. People way in the back finally have a chance to hear what the heck that question is. So don't just plow into the question, the answer, to say, oh, here's the answer. Because if people don't know what the question is, the answer won't make any sense. Repeat the question. So they get, oh, okay, that's what you're talking about. I get it. It makes sense. All right. And then once you repeat the question, then they can go on. Then you can go on and do the second step of the question. First step, repeat the question. Once you repeat the question, you go on to the second step of the question. The second step of answering the question is very important because that's where the rubber meets the road. Then you got to take the second step. Now, the second step can be a challenge, can be a difficulty. But it's that important step to take. And it's kind of obvious. And you hear the second step, you say, oh, of course. But it's an important thing to think about. Because you're answering this question on the fly. When you take that important second step, then you really can start to work. Then you really start to go somewhere, and people start to get a sense of where you're coming from, what you're about. You get more confident in what you're answering, because you're taking that important second step. The audience becomes more confident and more relaxed and more comfortable. Quickly you get that thing answered. It's a simple thing to do, but an important thing to do. The second step in answering the question is support. Second step is support. Once you repeated the question, now that gives you a little time to think about it. And then you've got to answer the question. And when you answer the question, you want to make sure that you support what you're saying. It's very easy, if you've got very strong opinions, just go out there and just say, well, this is the way it is. That's just the way it is. But if you don't support it, then your audience won't be convinced. Now, hopefully in this speech you give, there's a lot of supporting things already in your speech. The question and answer session should simply use its support based on the things you already mentioned. After all the things you already mentioned got the audience kind of nodding along. So now you go to the situation where you got to support your answer. Hopefully you can dip into your speech and say, well, here's that supporting thing you just heard before. Remember that? That was my point. That's how I support it. And when you're supporting, don't just make one point. Try to make a couple of strong points and really support what you're saying. The audience may or may not agree with it, but they do have to understand it. They do have to understand it. So when you support what you're saying, they've got to say, okay, well, I don't know if I agree with that, but I get where you're coming from. I understand what you're about. That makes sense. Support is very important. Some speakers go into the question and answer situation and they really haven't thought it through, or they get thrown a question they find what to do with, and they kind of try to just, well, that's not really here or there, and there are problems. Sometimes the question is way off base, and you say, well, that's not, I can talk about that later, it's nothing to do with this. But sometimes the question is on base, and you're just not quite ready for it. It's all right. You got a strong opinion, you got an idea. That's why you're up there in front of people, because you get this strong idea, this strong opinion. Support it. And if you can't find anything in your own speech to support it, think about your own experience. About the experience you had as you went through and you created the speech. And, okay, you found some other information. Hopefully you found more information in the speech than you decided to actually put into the speech. So you can go back and think, oh, that's right, I read about that. Yeah, okay. And here's how I support my answer. Remember, not just one support, but at least two. 3 would be good too. Because this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you're going to get your credibility afterwards. If the audience starts throwing you questions and you say, I got no idea, that's not good. That's where your whole speech just crashes and burns in front of you because you aren't supporting stuff you were talking about. So support is very important. The whole audience now understands what they're talking about, what the question is, because you repeated it. Its question is clear in their head. Now in order to understand and really get what you're talking about in terms of an answer, they need to have that strong support. It's an easy thing to leave out, but don't. Just put 1 point, 2 points, ideally 2 points, to support, hopefully taken from your speech. If not taken from your speech, taken from research you're doing when you're creating your speech, that's enough support. And the question and answer session is very useful because you've got that question and you've repeated it, you supported it. There's something you can do even more to make even more use out of the answer to that audience question. Okay. Situation so far. You repeated the question. Great. You supported the question. Now there's a third step. Third step most speakers leave out. And because of that, they don't make as much of the question and answer period as they could. You put in that third step, and the question and answer session becomes really useful. It's just anchoring that idea solidly in your audience's mind. That idea that supports the speech and what you're talking about. The third point, once you start using it, the third step once you start using it is very powerful because it just gives you that confidence, that certainty, and gets the audience more relaxed and more willing to go along with what you're saying. And the third step is review. The third step is review. That's the final step of when you're answering questions. Yeah, you repeated the question. Great. Everyone knows what you're talking about. You definitely are supporting with a couple of points. Now review it. Go a little bit deeper into it. After all, your audience may be thinking, I don't think so. I don't agree with this at all. If you can understand that in advance, what common objections of your audience are, you can then state that out loud and then state why these points handle those objections. You get a chance to go a little more in depth to the question, the answer to the question, a little more inside there, and you get a solider foundation. And that builds your credibility. People start believing you, thinking you're believable, you know what the heck you're talking about. It's all good when you review. So you can say something like, a common objection is that the AMF factor is not used in this situation. However, it actually is, and it's used in this way. Or you might be thinking, Tim, I don't think it's going to be used in that situation. Yeah, I understand what you're thinking now, but actually it is used in that situation. That's how you can review. Cover all the points you talked about. Now you get a chance to review the whole answer. And go a little bit outside. And here's another place where you can bring in more supporting material. I didn't talk about it or go much depth into my speech about it. But there is more information about why this is an important thing to do. Well, the AMF factor is so very important and so very useful. So for instance, there's this situation. And there's this situation over here. So when those things occur, that's when you use the AMF factor. Review. And review gives you a chance to develop, to work on, to get this whole thing just made a little bit bigger and a little bit solider. So if there are places in your speech where you're thinking, oh, I didn't really explain it as well as I could, now in the question and answer session, when you're reviewing that important point, you can really lock it down. And if you missed something in your speech, you forgot about it, you didn't get it in there, it happens. You're human, it happens. Now you can put it in. I didn't mention in my speech, but a very important thing is that can help a lot. So the review time is a chance to really get the answer to that question that's directly related to the speech you're given, and really get that firmly fixed in the audience's mind. Chance to get some of those doubts out of their head by acknowledging, well, you may think this, but actually it's like this. And if they think there's some things you left out or there's more things you can put into it, fantastic. Elaborate a little bit more on those supporting points when you're reviewing things. And as new things come into your head as you're reviewing it, open up some of those ideas too. The purpose of the question and answer period is simply to get your ideas and your thoughts firmly anchored in the audience's mind and clear up any remaining doubts they might have. And the review period is fantastic for that. Have a good review. The audience afterwards thinks, yeah, I'm going along with it. You made your point. All right, to wrap things up, you're doing the question and answer period. It can be do or die. Or it can be do and die if you do it the wrong way. But if you keep in mind 3 simple steps, question and answer period will be your chance to shine, your chance really to make it happen. The first step, the crucial first step, is to make sure and repeat. Repeat. People, the first time they hear something, really don't hear it. So if somebody asks a question, people around them may not even be able to hear it or understand it. When you repeat that question and make sure everybody is on the same page, everybody understands what it is you're answering. Everyone understands what your answer is. Everyone gets where everything is starting out at. Repeat. Very important. It also is a chance to clarify. Say what you're asking is, and then explain a little bit more detail. And if they don't agree, it's all right. You can re-repeat and clarify until everyone agrees that, okay, this is the question. Once you have repeated the question, the second thing is to support the question. This should be a pretty simple thing to do. You've studied your speech, you know about the subject, you really understand it very well. Hopefully you understand it beyond just the level of your speech. Done some other work and research on it. So you know what's going on. You can support your ideas. Bring in 1 point or 2 points. Ideally, if you can take them from the speech and take them out of the speech and just put them in here and says, as you heard earlier, this is why this is so important. But if you've got some other points, that's fine too. Bring those in. The goal is to just anchor that point solidly. So when you're answering it, something directly relevant to the point you're trying to make to your audience, and to your audience, you say, okay, I get it. Okay, you've supported it well. That makes sense to me. So support that answer. And then finally, the thing most speakers don't do, but if you do, it'll help you tremendously, review. Review. And all that means is go into that answer a little bit more. You got a couple points you made, great, but open it up a little bit more and review it. Think about some things they might be thinking the opposite and acknowledge that. You might be thinking this doesn't apply for this reason and that reason, but actually it does apply because of this and this and this. Bring that stuff in there. There may be a lot of things you couldn't mention in the speech because speeches are a very small amount of time period. So now you can bring in even more thoughts and more ideas. Things you didn't have time to put in the speech in the question and answer session, you can stick those things in there. The review period gives you a chance to really make a solid point, a solid answer. And this solid answer, this solid point, will help solidify that speech and that speech point in your audience's mind. So afterwards, they have any doubts, like, well, I don't know what that guy was saying, and think, oh, wait a minute. No, I remember that answer session. They had a good point. That's what they're doing. Because whatever that guy or gal is saying, you want to make sure you've changed your audience. So your audience thinks and does things in a different way immediately after your speech, a week after your speech, a year after your speech, 2 years, and a strong question and answer session with a good review can make that happen. Speeches live or die on their question and answer session. Some speakers simply avoid the question and answer session altogether because it creates so much problems in getting that speech point across. But if you have to do a question and answer session, or if you're feeling that you really, really understand your point and you're okay with the audience digging further into it and trying to undermine you, have that question and answer session and use it to make sure you have that strong, solid foundation of your point. So your audience gets what you're saying and you understand what you're saying. And that 3-step process of the successful question and answer session is to repeat, support, and review.